And we're off to the races. So, all right, thanks everyone for joining us tonight. We're talking about debunking the latest diet trends, and there's plenty of them out there. So, unfortunately, unless you guys have nothing planned for the next month, we're probably not going to cover them all. But Scott was just going to, as we were planning for this, Scott and I kind of thought like, hey, it would be really helpful. There's so much, there's a lot of great information out there. There's a lot of bad information out there. There's a lot of like misleading or maybe like taken out of context information out there. And so we were just going to look at really in particular like three of the hot topics that are really popular right now and talk about the good, the bad, the ugly, and most importantly, what can you do with that information? So Scott, let's start off by first and foremost, let's talk about the anti-inflammatory diet. All right. So to start off, like, why is this getting so much attention?
Yeah, it's coming into this too. I had a really hard time trying to narrow down these topics, and I felt like, keto's been around for a long time. Um, Paleo, obviously, intermittent fasting, and a lot of these things have kind of had their time. And I feel like a lot of people kind of generally know the ins and outs and maybe the pros and cons, at least to some extent. But these are three, the topics we're going to talk about tonight, including the anti-inflammatory diet, are three topics that I feel like are just really hot right now. And people, uh, there's a lot of conviction around all three of these topics. And it's really all or none. And a lot of this is kind of vilified. So starting off the anti-inflammatory diet, there's a ton of research around this, and it's really exploded. Some of the reading that I was doing over the past couple of weeks show that there has been over 60,000 new papers in the last year alone on this topic, which is absolutely crazy. I think the rise in kind of attention to it really stems from the fact that most people to some extent maybe have some of these symptoms and they can't really explain it, and inflammation just seems to be this thing that is really easy to put a finger at because you can't necessarily see it. You can see some of the signs and symptoms, but they could be coming from a number of other things as well. So it's just, I think a lot of people just don't really feel that good in general, whether it's from a lack of sleep, work-life balance, nutrition, not moving enough, not getting enough exercise, and it's all related essentially. But essentially, chronic inflammation can lead to type 2 diabetes, plaque buildup in the blood vessels when they're chronically inflamed, an increased risk of cancer, other things like asthma, autoimmune diseases. And so they're all just really common things that many people struggle with.
Wow, 60,000 papers written in the last year. So no,
I didn't read them all.
no, you didn't, not in the last week. That's
No.
unfortunate. So I guess he's slacking. So all right, based on what you have read though, like how would you like who's at risk and how do you know, if someone says, "Boy, this sounds like me," or this could be something that's, affecting me. Like what would you say to that?
Yeah. And so there is a natural increase in inflammation that comes along with age. People who may struggle with it also are those under chronic stress. Again, not getting enough sleep or work-life balance, just maybe uh, not getting enough activity or not recovering adequately from their activity, which could be related to nutrition as well. But there's also a significant increase in inflammation in those that are overweight and obese. The Having an excess amount of fat tissue does send out more inflammatory signals. Some of the symptoms that people might experience, um, the it's kind of hard to really describe, but that feeling that you get when your body's trying to fight a virus or a cold, that kind of crummy feeling, that's essentially what inflammation feels like. And if you can imagine living with that, if even to a lesser extent, it's not fun. And I think that's why it's such a hot topic right now.
Okay, yeah. What and when people talk about like the claims or common claims around inflammation, how would you describe some of those?
Yeah. So I think as I was kind of reading and listening to other people, um, the three most common claims that kind of boiled down to were inflammation's effects on mental health, inflammation just interfering with essentially brain neurons, leading to that brain fog and just general fatigue. It's also strongly linked to nutrition. Certain foods seem to be the culprit of the villain right now. Tomatoes, nightshades, which is a whole category of foods, a whole family of foods, things like legumes, and there just seems to be kind of a ever revolving uh, culprit, and not just with inflammation. I feel like our society in general, Karen, we were just talking about this, just always has the need to kind of point the finger at something instead of taking a step back and really having a more broad, holistic view of what's actually going on in your day-to-day life. The third one, though, would be overexercising or certain uh, modes of exercise seem to get a lot of flack for increasing inflammation, things like high intensity training, hit training, stuff like that.
Yeah, stuff where you're just going at it 110 miles an hour day in, day out. Sure. Okay, talk a little bit more about like the impact of mental health and like the connection between inflammation and nutrition. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah. So there's been evidence stemming from doctors essentially noticing that some of the medications they were prescribing patients to ramp up inflammation to help fight certain conditions actually had negative effects on depression and mental health. Um, and really, what they found from taking a closer look at that initial observation was that research has now shown that inflammation produced by immune cells along the blood-brain barrier actually lead to or can lead to microscopic breakdowns in the blood-brain barrier, and so thus kind of allowing inflammation into the brain, and which has a lot of ramifications. Um, but good news is with certain medications, and then also just enough sleep, proper nutrition, good recovery, just a general healthier lifestyle, all those things can be reversed essentially.
So you're just so I understand correctly, so you're saying that certain prescription drugs that are used to fight inflammation can actually have a negative impact on your mental health, which is that accurate?
Yeah, and so that's how they initially kind of found that. And so the prescriptions that they were giving patients was they noticed an uptick in symptoms of higher inflammation. Then they took a closer look at it and realized that living in a really chronically stress out, high inflammatory state can lead to having essentially like leakage and like little holes in the blood-brain barrier, letting inflammation into the brain and leading to that chronic kind of brain fog, just feeling absolutely terrible all the time kind of feeling that I feel like a lot of people tend to live with.
Interesting. Yeah, we definitely see a lot of stressed out folks. There's a lot of stuff in life that we have to tackle every day. Okay, let's talk about more. Let's talk more specifically on the nutrition piece of this and like beneficial foods or supplements that could help to reduce the inflammation.
Yeah. So there are some definitely some good foods that can help, and there's also some foods that may not be so helpful, or that influencers of the media just again try to point the finger at that say are really harmful. But some of the beneficial foods, turmeric, been around for obviously thousands and thousands of years and is beneficial. Curcumin also beneficial. Things like ginger, cinnamon, omega three. Obviously, we've talked about omega threes before. Really, really good at reducing inflammation. But then also from a broader aspect, not necessarily looking at specific foods, just managing your blood sugar from day to day and trying to avoid those big peaks and valleys in the blood sugar, which is going to help avoid insulin resistance long term. Um, the most effective ways of doing that are just avoiding really ultra processed, really calorically dense foods, focusing more on foods that are really high in fiber, um, and just trying not to eat any like quote unquote naked carbs, where it's carbs for a meal or a snack where that's like all it is. Try to get some fiber, some protein, some healthy fats, fruits and veggies and stuff along with that. Try to mitigate the blood sugar spike.
So when you're talking about planning out your meals or thinking about what to eat, make sure you're not having something that's predominantly just carbs. You need to make sure you've got some fiber in there, some healthier fats and proteins and other things to really help balance that out. Is that correct?
Yeah. And so I think that is more plays more of an impact on reducing inflammation and preventing inflammation than any of the individual ingredients or supplements like turmeric. And while they do have their place and they are beneficial, the impact that they're going to play in comparison to just a general healthier diet that is more balanced and is controlling the blood sugar uh, throughout the day is going to be a lot more impactful.
Okay, nice. Let's all right, let's talk about like harmful foods. What are things that people should avoid?
Yeah, and so this is where it gets really tricky. A lot of this evidence is more anecdotal, and you know, if you talk to 10 people, you're going to get 10 different answers, which, for some people who have actual diagnosed medical conditions, could certainly be true. But the ones that seem to get the most negative press are the ones in that nightshade family. Um, Eggplants, tomatoes, potatoes, okra, and then various peppers. There's a lot of other ones in that family. But the main compound in those foods is solanine, and that really is the kind of villain, if you will. But it really there doesn't seem to be a whole lot of evidence actually showing a causal relationship there. Really, cutting out nightshades doesn't seem to be all that beneficial, and it's really a shame too because most of those foods in that category are also really good sources of fiber and polyphenols that have a lot of other benefits. And we just talked about fiber. But they're also really common in the Mediterranean diet, which has also been around for a long time. It incorporates a lot of tomatoes and it has shown a decrease in inflammation. There was actually one of the studies that I came across showed that C reactive protein or CRP, which is just an inflammatory marker, like a biomarker, it decreased by 40% after 1 year in individuals on a Mediterranean diet. And so if just for people to say that tomatoes are inflammatory and these certain other foods are inflammatory, but they're also extremely prevalent in the Mediterranean diet and in the diets of millions of people that aren't really having these issues. There must be something a lot bigger at play, which essentially boils down to just eating way too much, not necessarily eating too much of any one thing. It's just an excess of calories in general. Um, so instead, just focusing more on trying to avoid processed foods containing excess sugar, excessive saturated fats, and foods that are void of fiber. So just again, fiber. It's a good reminder. Just try to limit the amount of added sugar that you're consuming in a day. Um, the actual recommendation, and I personally, I don't really keep track of this as far as like how much added sugar. I just try to keep it as low as possible for myself personally. But the recommendation is around like 17 to 20, 30 grams a day. That's like, one candy bar or like a half of a soda or even juice. The average daily consumption in America ranges from 68 to 135 grams of added sugar per day. That's a lot, and that is really the real villain here, and it's not so much the nightshades in the fresh produce that you're eating.
Got it. So you're suggesting that not we shouldn't worry so much about the nightshade foods where whereas some people feel that that's a big thing that you should prioritize. You're suggesting that the evidence actually doesn't support that and that there's plenty
Yeah,
of fish to fry.
yeah, it's just in excess in general
Got it.
is the real culprit, and they're the ultra processed foods. They essentially like hack your brain. They're designed to be extra yummy, and they're produced to make you want more and more and more all the time, and that's the real issue.
Okay. Well, before we move on to our next topic, how would you compare various diets on inflammation? Just give us a couple, like two examples there.
Yeah. So I like this one because it did mention intermittent fasting, which, we mentioned in the beginning, and I think we've hit on this before too, but it's also really popular. But it looked at intermittent fasting versus just a balanced diet, no fasting, but it was equated for calories throughout the day. So equal amount of calories, intermittent fasting versus normal diet, same amount of calories across the board. It showed no benefit with intermittent fasting when the calories were equated. There was a reduction in inflammation in both groups, but it was more related to a total decrease in body fats. And so, again, it's with the diets, and the reason that there's so many diets out there is that they're really just tools. They're tools in the toolbox. One's not necessarily better than the other. The most important one, which isn't the sexy answer, everyone's always looking for like the next thing and just the quick fix to try to get out of the situation that they're in. It's really the best one's going to be the one that you're able to stick to long term, for not just a month or 2 months or 6 months, but really long term over the course of several years. The Mediterranean diet is the next one, and this one's really great. We've talked about this before also. It showed a 30% decrease in heart disease if followed long term. It also reduced the risk of cancer. Inflammation can actually help tumors grow. And as previously mentioned, the Mediterranean diet showed a 40% decrease in inflammation after just 1 year.
Nice, interesting. So, as far as comparing various diets on inflammation, to wrap this up, you would say that more look at like what they have in common, which is more less processed foods, a reduction in calories, as opposed to intermittent fasting versus Mediterranean. So instead of looking at like what's unique for each one, look at what more they have in common, which is less processed foods and reduce calories, and that's probably the key to reducing inflammation. Is that
Yeah,
accurate?
that's a really good way to put it.
Okay, cool. All right, any takeaways before we move on?
No, I think again, it's just the amount of excess that people, especially in American culture, just tend to live in day to day. There's just way too much of it, and there's no real uh, villain. The villain is just everything combined. It's not the nightshades. It's not any one thing in particular.
Got it. Yeah, my takeaway based on everything you just said was before worrying about anti-inflammatory diets, look first at the just total caloric intake and begin there. Okay, awesome. So what's the number two on our list tonight? What do we want to talk about?
Yeah. Um, Seed oils. Seed oils, and I uh, kind of hesitated bring this topic up because it's almost like religion. Like for some reason, seed oils right now are uh, like there's just so much conviction around it, and when you talk to people about it, it's like the food companies and everybody are just totally out to get you, and they're doing it by design to make us sick, and it's almost conspiratorial to some extent.
All right. Well, what are some of the claims?
Yeah. So some of the claims off the top, there's people just say that they are industrial byproducts or waste products. Um, they are heated during processing, causing harmful oxidation. The third one is seed oils are washed in solvents during their processing. Some of the solvents, like hexane, which is a known neurological toxin, um, can be true. But the fourth one is seed oils cause inflammation. Um, so going back up to the top of the first one, the industrial byproducts or waste claim, um, really the fact that an ingredient is used in industrial applications doesn't really tell you anything about the ingredient. Water is used in industrial processing. It can also be a waste ingredient. Same thing with salt, baking soda. So there's a lot of other ones, but it doesn't really mean that it's bad for you in general. The heat treated processing claim, they are heated when they're processed. When they're processed, the refined oils are heated. Um, they do that to drive out the volatile compounds that are present in the oil, and it actually makes the oil more stable. So it's refined oils have a higher smoke point that makes them more stable, and the temperature that they're heated to during processing is lower than their smoke point. So oxidation really doesn't occur during the refinement process. It's not really a concern. Um, the hexane and wash in solvents claim. Hexane is used and it is a neurological toxin, but it is essentially a solvent that they use to extract the oil from the seeds during processing. They then remove it from the oil, leaving virtually no hexane left in the finished product. There's really no evidence to substantiate any risk or danger to consumers um, when the amount is so low. It's like a few like parts per million. There's been no evidence showing that it's harmful in any way in those amounts. Um, the refined vegetable oils extracted with hexane contain less than 1 part per million of residual hexane. And one of the tidbits I came across in a study showed that it's estimated that the level of ingestion of hexane from all food sources is less than 2% of the daily intake from all other sources, primarily gasoline fumes. So this is stuff that's in the air. The stuff that you're consuming from foods is just a tiny drop in the bucket. It's so low. It's not really a concern. The inflammation claim that seed oils cause inflammation. Most of these claims really stem from old or outdated rodent studies. As we know, we're not rodents. Um, so the evidence strongly shows really the opposite of this claim is true. Human trials consistently show that omega-6 fatty acids don't cause inflammation. Actually, increasing omega-6s in the diet shows modest reductions in coronary heart disease. It also further decreases the amount of saturated fat that people are likely to consume if they're increasing the omega-6 fatty acids. So replacing saturated fat for omega-6 fatty acids is generally pretty beneficial. And finally, an analysis by the American Heart Association found that eating more omega-6 fatty acids either reduced markers of inflammation or left them unchanged. So it definitely has not shown an increase in inflammation in any way.
Interesting. Not so sure about that rodent comment. You clearly haven't met some of the people I have, but we won't go get into that. So, as far as the seed oils, you're suggesting that that may not be near as big of a concern as some people are making it out to be, or that there's probably again bigger fish to fry or other things to be focusing on.
Yeah, and it. Give it a few years. It'll be something else. It's the same way, saturated fat had its moment, sugar, like all these things to some extent are true. And if you're eating an obscene amount of seed oils, it can certainly be an issue. if it's in excess, but you could say the same thing for water and everything else. But to date, there's been a lot of research, and not really any of it has shown an increase in inflammation in humans.
Okay. All right. Well, let's switch gears and move on to our third topic, which there may be a little more benefits too. So, what let's talk about creatine. So that's something that gets brought up. We have a lot of questions around that in the gym on a weekly basis. So, creatine, what is it? What does it do, and where does it come from? Let's start there.
Yeah, this is an exciting one. And I wanted to talk about it because they're like traditionally, it's been around for 50 plus years. It's one of, if not the most heavily studied supplement on the market, and it's pretty safe. But there have been a lot of new claims, and there's a lot of newer research out, and so it's just kind of exciting. And I feel like every time I like even turn on the radio, like just there's new stuff coming out all the time. It's always in the headlines. So what is it? It's just naturally produced in your body. Your liver, your kidneys, your pancreas all make it to some extent. It's pretty safe. It's you don't have to take a lot. The average effective dose is like 3 to 5 grams a day, which is a teaspoon essentially. Um, the only risk factor in taking it's for 99% of people really safe. If you do have a pre-existing renal issue, maybe avoid it. Other than that, it's pretty much good for most people. But essentially, what it does is it just helps your body produce more energy, more of that really fast, explosive energy for strength training, for the like sprinting, playing sports, that stuff where it's stop and go sports, short bursts, where it's, under that 10-second kind of threshold, marathons, stuff like that. While it could still provide some benefit in the weight room, which could in turn give some benefits to running, it doesn't have direct benefits, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I would push back. There is one other negative side effect to creatine. If you do travel with it, it is a white powder substance speaking from experience going through airports, that can get a little sketchy. But so just fair warn. Don't say you weren't warned. So creatine is something you believe that does have benefits, especially for our client base, and so it is something you would recommend.
Yeah, definitely. And so we'll talk about some of the like newer research or newer claims
Sure.
in a
Yeah.
moment, but just in even in so for um, a lot of our members trying to lose fat, it does help just maintain some of the muscle mass that you worked really hard to get, that you're naturally a little bit more likely to lose some of that muscle as you're losing a lot of weight. And so creatine just helps with that. It helps, get another one, two, three, maybe 4 reps on a certain lift, which may not seem like a big deal. And it may not even be something that you really notice right away, but over time can have a, a big effect, just that kind of compounds over time. Um, so some of the newer claims or newer research really revolve around the cognitive benefits, and claimed big boosts in mental clarity and focus. There's also research around its effects on depression and also in the aging population. So the cognitive benefits, your brain uses ATP, just like all your muscles. And that's really what creatine is broken down and turned into for energy. Your body uses ATP for energy. So your brain does that the same way your muscles do. And one study looking at memory while supplementing with creatine really didn't show any improvement, but there was a really cool study that studied its effects on reaction time and then also on memory while the subjects were sleep deprived. It showed a huge benefit, and so they're really not sure why yet. There's more research needs to be done, but both the groups showed significant improvement. Um, the uh, the kicker here, though, is that they were given like 10 times the normal dose per day. It was up to 35 grams a day, I believe. You know, huge amount. But there really still weren't any side effects at that high dose. But it's kind of wishy-washy. There's probably some benefit there with the cognitive benefits, but I just thought it was kind of exciting that it's going to lead to further research that could definitely show some stuff in the future. Its effects on depression. One study showed that people with depression were given creatine alongside a course of cognitive behavioral therapy. And the researchers found that over 8 weeks, their symptoms improved more than those who had the therapy alone without the creatine. And so it's thought that due to its role in energy production and usage in the brain, when creatine levels are low, this definitely could affect energy production in the brain, but also levels of certain neurotransmitters like um, uh, dopamine and other things like that. And so it's, again, not super conclusive, but another just kind of cool thing that I saw in the headlines that, definitely could lead to further research down the line. And the most exciting one that I came across was a meta-analysis looking at the effects of creatine in the aging population. Um, they reviewed a huge number of studies, and really what they found was that for older adults, it can definitely be beneficial in helping to counteract the age-related muscle loss, that sarcopenia, that most people over the age of like 60 tend to experience, and it improved physical function. They also looked at the effects on bone mineral composition, and it did have a positive role in the bone mineral composition in some, but not all the studies. Um, there definitely seems to be an activation of cells that were involved in bone formation and resorption. So again, a lot of our population um, is, they fall well within this category. But then it also showed potential to decrease the risk of falls experienced by aging adults, which was really cool to see. It also had a reduced risk of fractures associated with those falls, which has a huge impact. Um, the final one was there's preliminary evidence suggesting that creatine may have anti-inflammatory effects during bouts of elevated metabolic stress. So, like really, really intense activity, um, like on consecutive days, essentially.
Nice. Yeah, that's all very exciting stuff. To kind of add to that on creatine, the way I look at it as someone that's taken it for years personally, it's relatively inexpensive. I'm not suggesting get it from us, although you can, but I think for like $40 will last you like 3 months. So it's gonna, that's like I said, it's gonna last a while. It's a pretty worthwhile investment, in my opinion. As someone that, again, when you look at like the effects on aging, the cognitive function, the muscle, lots of positive benefits, and there's no calories in it either. So, it's not as if it's adding in a ton of calories too, which is always something, always not the main factor, but it just one piece of the equation. Scott, anything else you want to comment on creatine?
No, and there's again for a normal, healthy individual, there's not really a downside. The biggest negative effects, although I've taken it for years also on and off, and I've never had any of these, but the worst it gets is like maybe some bloating, water retention, that kind of stuff. If you do start taking it, there's really essentially only benefits. I will say if you hop on the InBody or if you're weighing yourself on a regular basis and you see the scale going up just a little bit, it's just water. You store the creatine that you're supplementing with in your muscles. It doesn't get stored as a dry powder like when you're, actually buying it. It draws in water into your muscles too, which can help muscles look maybe a little bit bigger, a little bit fuller, but it does make you retain a little bit more water. But if you do see the weight going up a little bit. That's all it is. But there's really not any negative, uh, or just downside to actually doing it.
Okay, nice. All right. Before we wrap up here, if anyone has any questions, feel free to post them in the chat, unmute yourself and fire away. But to kind of wrap things up, looking at these three things, the anti-inflammatory diet, seed oils, and creatine. With the anti-inflammatory diet, to really summarize what Scott was saying, focus first on the calorie intake. That seems to be the biggest way to move the needle. Sure, there are some foods that may help with that, but it's probably, if you're worried about an anti-inflammatory diet without the calorie reduction, Scott, would you say it's accurate? It's almost like trying to put a Band-Aid on a problem. Like if you want to get to the root cause of the problem, start with the calorie intake. Is that appropriate?
Yeah, calorie intake and then also sleep. Sleep is really understated, and if it, I feel like even if you're taking creatine, let's say for the purpose of trying to get stronger, if you're taking creatine and you're not getting at least 7 hours of sleep, you're still shooting yourself in the foot. It just bring everything back to the basics. It's really it. If you're getting at least 7 to 10,000 steps a day, sleeping 7 hours a night, and then also staying adequately hydrated, getting enough protein, and not over consuming on your total calories, you're going to be pretty well off.
Nice. I like it. All right.